John Donato Torrio was an Italian-born American mobster who helped build the Chicago outfit in the 1920s, later inherited by his protégé Al Capone. Torrio proposed a national crime syndicate in the 1930s and later became an advisor to Lucky Luciano and his Luciano crime family. His first jobs were as a porter and bouncer in Manhattan. While he was a teenager, he joined a street gang together with another James Street resident, Robert Vanella, and became its leader. He eventually managed to save enough money and opened a billiards parlor for the group, and from there grew illegal activities such as gambling and loan sharking. Torrio's business sense caught the eye of Paul Kelly, the leader of the 5 Points Gang. Torrio's gang ran legitimate businesses, but its primary concern was the numbers game, supplemented by incomes from bookmaking, loan sharking, hijacking, prostitution, and opium trafficking. Al Capone, who worked at Kelly's club, admired Torrio's quick mind and looked to him as his mentor. Capone had belonged to the Junior 40 Thieves, the Bowery Boys, and the Brooklyn Rippers. They soon moved up to the 5 Points Gang. Torrio eventually hired Capone to bartend at the Harvard Inn, a bar in the Coney Island section of Brooklyn owned by Torrio's business associate, Frankie Yale. By 1909, Torrio moved to Chicago. Big Jim Colosimo, who had become head of a burgeoning vice empire in Chicago, is reputed to have invited him to the city to help him deal with Black Hand extortionists. After doing so, Torrio became a top lieutenant in Colosimo's organization, rising to underboss by 1914. In 1919, Al Capone arrived in Chicago and started working as a bouncer and bartender at one of the Colosimo gang establishments, the Four Deuces at Wabash Street. When Prohibition went into effect in 1920, Torrio pushed for the gang to enter into bootlegging, but Colosimo stubbornly refused. In March 1920, Colosimo secured an uncontested divorce from Moresco. A month later, he and Dale Winter eloped to West Baden Springs, Indiana. Upon their return, he bought a home on the south side. On May 11, 1920, Colosimo drove to Colosimo's Cafe to meet an associate he had never met before. He was shot and killed a few minutes after entering the restaurant by a gunman hiding in the cloakroom. A bullet entered Colosimo's brain, behind his right ear. Contract killer Frankie Yale had allegedly traveled from New York to Chicago and personally killed longtime gang boss Colosimo at the behest of Torrio. Although suspected by Chicago police, Yale was never officially charged. Colosimo was allegedly murdered because he stood in the way of his gang making bootlegging profits, having gone soft after his marriage with Winter. Torrio headed an essentially Italian organized crime group that was the biggest in the city, with Capone as his right-hand man. However, many other gangs were active in Chicago at this time, and Torrio was wary of being drawn into gang wars and tried to negotiate agreements over territory between rival crime groups. In 1920, Torrio built an agreement between most of Chicago's bootlegging gangs into a citywide cartel. The smaller North Side gang led by Dean O'Banion was of mixed ethnicity and was a member of the bootlegging cartel. In 1924, the North Side gang discovered that the Jenna brothers, close to Torrio's gang, were selling their booze in North Side gang territory. O'Banion went to Torrio, who was unhelpful with the encroachment of the Jennas into the North Side despite his pretensions to be a settler of disputes. As a result, the North Side gang responded by hijacking Jenna beer shipments. In May 1924, O'Banion learned that the police planned to raid the Zeben brewery on a particular night. Before the raid, O'Banion approached Torrio and told him he wanted to sell his share in the brewery, claiming that he wanted to leave the rackets and retire to Colorado. Torrio agreed to buy O'Banion's share and gave him $500,000. On the morning of the deal, the police raided and shut down the brewery. Torrio, O'Banion, and several others were arrested. Torrio was indicted on bootlegging charges, a repeat offense for him with mandatory jail time. Torrio realized he had been betrayed and conned out of $500,000 by O'Banion. Torrio would have immediately attempted to retaliate against O'Banion and the North Side gang had it not been for Mike Merlo, head of the Union Siciliana Labor Organization. Merlo had a vested interest in keeping the peace between Chicago's gangs, and he convinced Torrio to forestall any violence against the North Side gang. Mike Merlo died of cancer on November 8, 1924. On November 10, 3 men entered O'Banion's Schofield's Flowers shop under the pretense of buying flowers for Merlo's funeral and shot O'Banion dead. The killers are reputed to have been Frankie Yale, John Scalise, and Albert Anselmi. acting on Torrio's behalf. O'Banion's death placed Himmy Weiss at the head of the Northside Gang, backed by Vincent Drecci and Bugs Moran. Weiss had been a close friend of O'Banion, and the Northsiders made it a priority to get revenge on his killers. In January 1925, Capone was ambushed, leaving him shaken but unhurt. 12 days later, on January 24th, Torrio and his wife Anna were ambushed outside their home by Weiss, Drecci, and Moran. Torrio was shot several times and nearly killed. After recovering, he effectively resigned, handed control of the gang to Capone, and fled to New York. In late 1925, Torrio moved to Italy with his wife and mother, where he no longer dealt directly with the mob business. He gave total control of the outfit to Capone and said, "It's all yours, Almy. I'm quitting. It's Europe for me." Torrio left a criminal empire which grossed about $70 million a year, $1.2 billion in 2024, from bootleg liquor, gambling, and prostitution. In 1928, Torrio returned to the United States as Benito Mussolini began putting pressure on the mafia in Italy. He is credited with helping to organize a loose cartel of East Coast bootleggers, the Big Seven, in which many prominent gangsters, including Lucky Luciano, Lungies Willman, Joe Adonis, Frank Costello, and Meyer Lansky played a part. Torrio also supported the creation of a national body that would prevent all-out turf wars between gangs that had broken out in Chicago and New York. His idea was well received, and a conference was hosted in Atlantic City by Torrio, Lansky, Luciano, and Costello in May 1929. The National Crime Syndicate was created. Torrio was charged with income tax evasion in 1936 and, after several failed appeals, was sent to prison in 1939, serving 2 years. In 1940, a property that Torrio co-owned with Vanella, Jack Cusick, and Capone was sold at auction to satisfy Capone's tax delinquencies. After his release, he lived quietly until his death. On April 16, 1957, Torrio had a heart attack in the Brooklyn borough of New York City, New York, while he was sitting in a barber's chair waiting for a haircut. He died several hours later in a nearby hospital.